It began the summer they reopened Briar's Hollow Elementary. The town of Willow Creek had been quiet for years, the kind of place where nothing really happened, where every porch light flickered the same dull yellow after sunset. But when the old school reopened after 3 decades of silence, people started whispering again. They said there was a reason the place had been boarded up, something buried under its playground that the town wanted to forget. Nobody remembered the full story, not even the sheriff, but the older folks avoided that part of town like it was cursed. On the first day of summer break, for friends Liam Carter, Harper Dunn, Cole Wyatt, and Nora Fields decided to sneak in. They were the kind of kids who believed ghost stories were just made-up lessons to keep people scared. The building stood on the edge of the woods, surrounded by tall grass that moved like something alive. The swings still hung there, rusted chains squealing softly in the breeze, and the merry-go-round spun once on its own when they arrived. Liam laughed nervously. "Guess the devil still plays here," he said, kicking a rock. Nobody laughed back. The air smelled of rain and burnt metal. Harper's flashlight flickered even though she had just changed the batteries. Nora kept glancing at the woods, whispering that she heard kids giggling somewhere out there, though no one else could. When they reached the playground, Cole brushed the dirt off an old wooden sign half buried in mud. Faded letters carved into it read, "Do not dig." They thought it was a joke until Liam tripped on something metal sticking out of the ground. It was a handle, old and rusted, attached to a square trapdoor. Curiosity won. Together they pulled it open. The smell that came out was thick, like wet rot and ash. A ladder disappeared into blackness. Liam grinned nervously. Only one way to find out. He went first. The others followed, one by one, their phone flashlights cutting through decades of dust. The tunnel walls were covered in children's drawings, stick figures with no faces, painted in something dark that had dried long ago. As they moved deeper, the sound of dripping water echoed like whispers. Then they found the room. At the center sat a carousel, smaller than the one above ground, but built entirely of bones, tiny bones, shaped into horses and bars. It creaked slowly as if someone had just stepped off. Harper turned to leave, but a child's voice whispered. From behind her, soft and clear, "Stay and play." The lights went out. When they came back, Liam was gone. Only his phone remained, still recording. On the screen was a blurry image, his face smiling too wide, eyes black, a shadow standing behind him that didn't move when the light did. That was the last night anyone saw Liam Carter alive, and by morning the town of Willow Creek would wake to screams coming from Briar's Hollow Elementary once again. By the time the sheriff's trucks rolled up to Briar's Hollow, the fog was so thick it clung to their headlights like wet cotton. Sheriff Dean McAllister had seen his share of strange calls, deer mutilations, missing hikers, even a family once swearing they'd found claw marks on their ceiling, but this felt different. There was a smell in the air, like something dead had been buried too shallow for too long. The kids' bikes were still there by the playground fence, wet with dew, seats turned toward the school like they were waiting for their owners to come back. They found Harper first, wandering barefoot in the field, eyes open but empty, clothes torn, feet bleeding. When Dean asked what happened, she just whispered, "He's still down there," before collapsing into the mud. Nora was found hours later, sitting at the base of the swings, humming the same 4 notes over and over again, her hands clutching something small and stiff. It was a tooth, a child's tooth. The search for Liam went on all day, but the tunnels they described didn't exist anymore. No trapdoor, no ladder, no underground carousel. The ground beneath the playground was solid concrete. The town decided it was just another case of kids scaring themselves stupid, but Dean didn't buy it. That night, while everyone else packed up, he stayed behind. The fog didn't lift. He stood where Harper said they'd opened the hatch and tapped his boot against the ground. It sounded hollow. He came back with a crowbar and a floodlight. The first strike cracked through the dirt, and a rush of cold air spilled out like the earth itself had exhaled. Beneath it, the metal door waited exactly where the kids said it would be. Dean climbed down, flashlight trembling in his hand. The air was colder than any basement, damp enough to make his breath visible. The walls were still covered in drawings, but now they looked wet, glistening as though freshly painted. And then he heard it, children laughing, faint but all around him, circling, echoing off the walls. He followed the sound deeper, boots crunching over something soft. When he shone his light down, the beam caught dozens of small shoes, all lined neatly in a row. In the center of the chamber, the carousel waited. Except now, it wasn't just bone, it was moving. Slowly, he could see faces in the pale shapes that formed the horses, faces frozen in mid-scream. and as it turned, something crawled across the dirt behind it. Small hands, dozens of them, pale as chalk, reaching out toward the light. Dean stumbled backward, hand shaking as he pulled his revolver. "Stay back," he whispered to no one. The laughter stopped. A child's voice, low and distant, came from somewhere behind the carousel. "You weren't invited." Then everything went black. He woke up hours later on the grass beside the playground, head pounding, the door gone again, the ground sealed tight. The fog had thinned, but the air felt wrong, heavier, still. In his hand was something cold and small, a carousel horse carved from bone. 2 days later, Harper was found dead in her hospital bed. The nurse said she'd been fine the night before, sedated, quiet, staring out the window, but sometime after midnight, the room filled with static, the lights flickered, and when they came back on, Harper was sitting upright, smiling. Her eyes were gone. Both sockets were empty. When they checked the hospital's security footage, they found something that froze everyone in the room. Just before the power cut, the screen showed the window reflection, not Harper, but a child in a dirt-stained dress standing behind her, holding a small carousel horse in one hand. After that, the sheriff sealed off Briar's Hollow again, but word spread fast, especially among the kids at the high school. Liam Carter's disappearance turned into a dare, a ghost story that every teenager wanted to test. By the end of summer, half the senior class had tried sneaking in, none stayed past midnight, except for one. Dylan Moore, 17, amateur filmmaker, thought he could capture something for his YouTube channel, The Real Devil's Playground. He wanted proof, not stories. On a stormy Friday night, he brought 2 cameras, a flashlight, and a crowbar. His live stream began at 11:47 p.m., showing the cracked slide and broken swing set as thunder rolled over the town. "If you're watching this," he said, panting from the rain, "this is where 4 kids vanished. They say the devil's still here. Let's find out." At exactly 12:03, the stream glitched. For 3 seconds, the screen showed something that didn't make sense: a field full of children standing still in the rain, their faces blurred, their heads all tilted the same way. Then static. When it returned, the camera was lying sideways, pointed at Dylan's feet as he whispered, "Someone's laughing." A faint creaking sound came through the mic, like metal spinning. Then, faintly, "I see him." The video cut out at 12:09. When police arrived the next morning, they found the crowbar stuck halfway into the dirt and another small bone horse beside it. The town buried the playground again, this time under asphalt, pouring. A parking lot over it, but that didn't stop the laughter. Some nights, after heavy rain, when the fog returns to Willow Creek, people say they can still hear the squeak of swings moving by themselves and the faint hum of a carousel turning somewhere underground. And if you listen closely enough, you can hear children whispering from beneath the pavement, "Come play with us, Sheriff Dean." The rain didn't stop for 3 days after Dylan Moore vanished. The streets of Willow Creek turned to rivers of red mud, the kind that smelled like rust and rot when it hit the old drains. Sheriff Dean McAllister barely slept, his mind replaying the same moment over and over: Harper's empty eyes, the laughter underground, the bone. Carousel that couldn't have been real but somehow was. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard it again, the faint, rhythmic creak of something turning slowly in the dark. On the 3rd morning, his radio crackled awake before sunrise. "Sheriff," a voice whispered through static, "you might want to see this." It was Deputy Laura Trent from the Records Department, stationed at the courthouse. "Archives," she sounded shaken. "We found something you should have seen years ago." Dean arrived before the sun rose. The archive room smelled like mildew and forgotten secrets. Laura stood beside a stack of old police reports spread across a metal table. "These were filed under Briar's Hollow Closure 1977, she said, voice low. The first report showed black and white photos of the playground before it. Was fenced off, same swing set, same slide. But the ground was littered with small white shapes that looked like stones. "What are those?" Dean asked. Laura swallowed. "Teeth," she said. "All of them." Another folder contained a coroner's report. 6 children, all from Willow Creek, found buried beneath the playground in shallow graves. Cause of death, unknown, eyes missing. Each grave marked with a small carved wooden horse. But that wasn't the worst part. The final page was a transcript of a town meeting, the one where the mayor ordered the school to be closed indefinitely. One line stood out, underlined in red ink: "Do not disturb the ground. He feeds on attention." Dean stared at those words until his hands began to shake. "Who's he?" Laura hesitated before pulling out an old, yellowed photograph. "You're not going to like this." The picture showed a group of schoolchildren lined up by the playground. Standing behind them was a tall man in a caretaker's uniform. face partially shadowed, but the outline of his smile was clear, too wide, too thin. Arthur Bell, Laura said, custodian from 1958 to 1977. He went missing the night the school burned. Dean traced the edge of the photo, the man's expression hauntingly familiar. I've seen him before, he muttered. Laura frowned. In your dream? Dean shook his head. In the reflection. When I was underground. He was standing behind the carousel. That night, Dean couldn't stay away. He drove back to Briar's Hollow, parking under the same flickering streetlight that had watched him all week. The asphalt was slick, rain pooling in shallow dips. He stood in the middle of the parking lot and felt the earth humming beneath his boots, faint like a heartbeat. I know you're there, he whispered into the fog. A low creak answered him. He knelt down, pressing his palm to the ground. For a second, nothing. Then a vibration, gentle, then stronger, until the water rippled outward like something was breathing beneath it. The surface split. A small wooden horse rose from the mud, spinning slightly before stopping upright, facing him. The air turned cold enough to burn. Dean backed away slowly, hand on his gun, but before he could move, the asphalt cracked. A small hand, pale and dripping, shot through the brake, grabbing his ankle. He fell hard as another hand reached out, then another. Dozens of them, clawing from beneath, small fingers covered in soil. A child's voice whispered, "We can't sleep." He yanked his leg free and ran to his truck, slamming the door just as something thudded against the window. He looked back once and wished he hadn't. The playground was moving. The asphalt rippled like waves, shapes rising and falling beneath it, as if the ground itself was made of skin. He drove straight to Pastor Whitlow's house, the only man in town old enough to remember the original closure. The pastor opened the door half awake, eyes hollow, face pale. "You shouldn't have gone there," he said before Dean could speak. "You stirred it up again." Dean grabbed him by the shoulders. "What the hell is it?" Whitlow took a deep breath and led him inside. The living room walls were covered in newspaper clippings, most too faded to read. "Back then," he began, "it wasn't called Briar's Hollow. It was St. Matthew's School for Children. The land was donated by a man named Arthur Bell. He said he wanted to build a place for lost kids, orphans, runaways, those nobody wanted." The pastor's voice trembled, but he wasn't saving them. He was feeding them to something. Dean stared in silence as Whitlow poured two glasses of whiskey with shaking hands. They found drawings. In the tunnels, pentagrams, animal bones, small coffins. He believed the devil lived under the soil, trapped, and that children's laughter could feed him. When the town found out, they tried to stop him, but the fire broke out that same night. The kids never came home. Dean's voice was barely a whisper. And the playground? The mayor paved it over, hoping to bury the evil with them, Whitlow said. But evil doesn't trot, Sheriff. It waits. Every 30 years, it wakes up hungry. Dean's stomach twisted as the realization hit. It's been 31. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. The lights flickered, once, twice, then died. In the darkness, something small laughed from the porch. A soft, childish giggle that made the pastor's breath hitch. He whispered, "They've found me again." The window shattered before Dean could move. A gust of wind blew through, carrying with it the smell of burnt earth and wet iron. On the floor, near the broken glass, lay a small carousel horse, this one carved from flesh, still bleeding. The laughter stopped. When the lights came back, the pastor was gone. Only his shoes remained, turned neatly toward the door. Dean backed away slowly, the walls groaning like the house itself was breathing. He stepped outside into the rain and froze. Across the street, the playground lights were on. All of them. The swings moving, the merry-go-round spinning. He felt it then, a pressure behind his eyes, a whisper crawling through his skull. "Come play, Sheriff." And for the first time in 30 years, the devil's playground was awake again. The next morning, the sun didn't rise over Willow Creek. A thick red haze hung in the air, like the sky itself was bruised. Sheriff Dean McAllister stood by his truck outside the police station, staring at the blackened horizon. Every instinct told him to leave town, but something deeper, colder, told him he couldn't. Not yet. The radio in his hand crackled only static, but beneath it, faint whispers like voices trapped in water. He slammed it shut and looked toward Briar's Hollow. The playground lights were still glowing through the fog, even in daylight. He drove there with a jerry can of gasoline and his service pistol. The closer he got, the worse the air smelled: mold, rot, something chemical, like old formaldehyde. The wind carried faint laughter that echoed through the hollow streets, and the road itself seemed to pulse, slick with black water that reflected the sky like a mirror. He parked near the broken fence, his boots sinking into mud as he stepped forward. The playground looked alive. The slide was trembling, the swing chains twisting. On their own, the ground underneath the merry-go-round was rising and falling like a slow breath. Dean uncapped the gasoline and poured it in a wide circle around the equipment, drenching the wood and soil. "You wanted attention?" He muttered under his breath. "You've got mine." He flicked the lighter, but before the flame caught, a whisper slithered through the fog, his name, drawn out like a sigh, "Dion." He spun around, through the mist. A figure was standing at the edge of the field, tall, thin, with a caretaker's hat tilted low, Arthur Bell. The same hollow smile from the photo, the same lifeless eyes. Dean raised his gun, but Bell didn't move. His mouth opened just enough to let out a sound that wasn't human, a wet, sucking breath, followed by a dozen voices whispering at once. "You can't burn the roots," it said. Dean fired once, then twice. The bullets passed through the figure, which shimmered and collapsed into ash that spread across the ground like spilled ink. For a moment, silence. Then the earth split open. A roar like 1,000 screams burst from below, and the merry-go-round lifted off its base, spinning violently, chains snapping. From the swings, pieces of rusted metal flying through the air. Dean ran, diving behind a tree as a black substance thick, tar-like erupted from the crack in the ground. Faces formed in it, stretching, screaming, melting back into the sludge. The smell was unbearable, like decay and fire mixed. He reached his truck, but before he could start it, something hit the windshield, a child's face. Pale and mud-streaked, eyes wide open but lifeless. It was Dylan Moore. The boy's mouth moved, no sound coming out, but Dean could read the words. "He won't let us go." Then the body slid off the glass, leaving a long red smear that steamed in the cold air. Dean's hands shook as he started the engine, tires spinning in mud before catching the road. He didn't stop until he reached the church on Main Street, or what was left of it. The front doors were wide open, candles burning inside, and on the altar stood Pastor Whitlow's Bible, opened to a torn page. Every verse was blacked out except one, Revelation 9:1, "And the star fell from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit." The wind blew through the doorway, and the candles flickered out. Dean felt it then, a presence behind him, cold and heavy, breathing down his neck. "You shouldn't have come alone," it whispered. He turned slowly. The pews were filled not with people, but with children. Dozens of them, sitting perfectly still, mud dripping from their faces, eyes like hollow glass. In their hands they held small wooden horses, rocking them gently in rhythm. A small girl in the front row tilted her head and smiled. "He's almost here." The church doors slammed shut. Dean raised his gun, backing toward the altar, but the air turned solid, thick and suffocating, like invisible hands pressing against his chest. The children began to hum, low and broken, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. The cross above the altar twisted slowly upside down. A voice spoke from everywhere at once. "Arthur, opened the gate, Sheriff. You've kept it closed long enough." Dean fell to his knees, clutching his head as the sound grew unbearable. The candles reignited, burning black now, dripping thick tar instead of wax. He forced himself up, staggered toward the door, and slammed his shoulder into it until the wood cracked. On the third hit, it gave way, and he stumbled into the rain. The church exploded. Behind him, not with fire, but with light. A column of crimson energy shot into the sky, spreading like veins across the clouds. The ground shook so violently he thought the world was splitting apart. He ran toward his truck, every instinct screaming to leave, but when he looked back he saw something rise from the playground far across town, a shape taller than the school. Had ever been twisting, writhing, made of hundreds of moving bodies fused together. The Devil's Playground had grown into something alive. He drove as fast as the road allowed, but Willow Creek was gone. The streets were warped, houses half sunk into the ground, cars overturned, people frozen mid-scream, faces stretched toward the sky. The whole town was sinking. He reached the edge of the highway, only to find it cracked open like a wound. Beyond it, nothing but mist. Dean stopped the truck, gripping the wheel until his knuckles turned white. "If I can't burn it," he whispered, "I'll bury it again." He threw the truck into reverse and sped back toward the hollow. The ground groaned, swallowing the tires, but he didn't stop. The black mass had spread across the field, pulsating like a heart. Arthur Bell stood in the center, arms raised, his face splitting open into a smile too wide for any human skull. Dean floored the accelerator. The truck roared forward, engine screaming, and hit Bell dead center, plowing into the heart of the mass. The impact sent a shockwave through the ground, then everything went silent. For a moment there was nothing but stillness. Then, from deep below, a sound began to rise, not a scream, not a growl. Something older, something that had waited too long. The earth collapsed, taking Dean, the truck, and the Devil's Playground with it. When the dust settled, Willow Creek was quiet again. The playground was gone. The lights were off. Only the wind moved through the trees. But if you stand there long enough, just before dawn, you can still hear it, the faint creak of chains and a voice, whispering from underground, "Tag. You're it." Morning never came to Willow Creek again. Just a dim red sky, frozen in dawn, the clouds dragging slow across a dead horizon. For weeks, no one dared drive near the hollow. The few who did said their engines died at the edge of town, radios flickering with old nursery rhymes and voices whispering, "Keep playing." They never stayed long. Enough to see what was left of the playground. But one man did, a storm chaser named Marcus Lane, drawn by reports of unnatural lightning and ground tremors. He wasn't a believer, not in ghosts or devils, just in proof. He arrived at dusk, camera in hand, unaware that something beneath the earth had already been waiting for him. The road into Willow Creek looked abandoned, but the air carried movement, faint echoes of laughter, a squeak of old metal in the wind. Marcus stopped his truck by what used to be the town sign. It had melted, the letters twisted into a single word, "Play." The deeper he walked, the heavier the fog became, pressing against his skin, like wet cloth. Houses leaned at odd angles, windows shattered outward, not inward. It looked like the whole town had been trying to escape itself. At the center of it all, the Devil's Playground had returned, not rebuilt, reborn. Rusted swings hung from skeletal trees, the slide dripped black water into a pit where the sandbox used to be. And in the middle stood the merry-go-round, spinning slowly though no wind touched it. Its surface gleamed like fresh oil, reflecting shapes that weren't his. Marcus lifted his camera, recording, narrating in a trembling whisper, coordinates. Willow Creek. Atmospheric anomaly. Sulfur in the air. But his voice didn't record. The playback only captured a child's voice, whispering right beside the mic, "You shouldn't have come." The ground trembled beneath his boots. A hand, small, pale, and twitching, pushed through the dirt near his feet. He stepped back, filming as another followed, then another. Dozens of hands clawing upward, mud-streaked faces of children emerging from the soil, eyes black and wet like tar. They didn't scream, they just stared. Marcus stumbled backward, tripping over a rusted seesaw, his flashlight cutting across the fog, and that's when he saw him. Arthur Bell, the caretaker. Only now his body wasn't human anymore. His face was stretched thin, eyes glowing red through sockets that wept ash, his limbs long and wrong, like something sculpted from every corpse buried beneath the hollow. He stood on what remained of the merry-go-round, each rotation cracking the earth beneath. "They never stopped playing," he rasped, his voice split between hundreds of tones, child and adult and demon all at once. "You think the sheriff ended it? He just fed us." Marcus ran. The fog chased him like a living thing, crawling under his skin, filling his lungs with whispers. He reached his truck, yanked open the door, but the back seat was already occupied. Sheriff Dean McAllister's face stared at him from the mirror, pale eyes black as tar. He mouthed a single word, "Drive." The engine roared to life, though Marcus hadn't turned the key. The radio blared an old tune, children singing "Ring Around the Rosie." The road cracked open beneath the tires as the truck sped toward the bridge. But when Marcus looked ahead, the bridge was gone. Only water, black and endless. The truck lifted, suspended mid-air, then plunged straight down into the lake. Silence, darkness, bubbles rising slow. The camera lights still blinked red. In that faint glow, Marcus saw faces floating beside him, dozens of them, drifting like leaves in water. Children, adults, some with open mouths, some still whispering through the dark. He tried to swim up, but the surface looked too far. The water shimmered, and for a moment he saw the playground above, but upside down, as if the lake itself was the mirror of another world. Arthur's voice filled the water. "Every town buries something. Ours buried me." A pale hand reached from behind Marcus and pulled him deeper. The deeper he sank, the clearer the world became, swings moving, lights flickering, children running and laughing around him in a silent, underwater version of the playground. He was inside it now. The Devil's Playground wasn't a place. It was a memory that ate the living. Marcus felt his lungs burn as a girl floated toward him, hair drifting like seaweed, her eyes full of black tears. "Play with us," she whispered. He opened his mouth to scream, but water filled his throat, and the camera slipped from his grip, falling into the pit below. Above the surface, the lake rippled once. then stilled. 2 days later, state investigators found the truck half submerged near the bank. No driver, no camera, just mud prints of small bare feet leading away into the forest. They sealed off Willow Creek again, calling it unsafe, contaminated, forgotten. But at night, locals say you can still see faint lights glowing from under the water like street lamps from a drowned town. Sometimes fishermen hear music drifting through the fog, the sound of swings, the hum of laughter. And when they throw their nets too deep, they come back up tangled with rusted chains and children's shoes. The last person who went there, a young journalist, swore he found an old photograph near the lake, half burned but still legible. It showed Arthur Bell standing in front of the playground with a group of kids in the back row. One face was circled in red: Sheriff Dean McAllister as a boy. The note on the back read, "He built it for us. We're still playing." And now, when the moon is low and the mist touches the lake, a faint voice carries across the water, giggling softly before fading into the dark, "Your turn."